Okay, so more details have emerged in the shocking arrival of Mr. Zambada Lopez Guzman to the United States. So they landed at an airport actually in New Mexico nearest major city is El Paso, and El Mayo's lawyer says that in fact, and you kind of, if you look at the photos of these guys, it makes sense. Zambada was called to a meeting with Mr. Guzman Lopez, and he brought a light security deal with him. So these guys, even though some of their groups, Los Rusos under El Mayo and Los Ninis and some others under the Chapitos have been kind of fighting over some territory, that they must be doing business at some level. He was called for a meeting, and that his security detail was overwhelmed, and he was grabbed, tied up, had a bag put over him, and he was thrown in a plane, which actually makes sense. Because the more I thought about it, the idea that he made a deal or that he was tricked, which was what the initial U.S. government line was, it doesn't make sense, because a guy like that, he would get on a plane without a single security agent. There was no security agent. This they can't be true. So a deal was cut. Remember, a video is in U.S. federal prison, has been since September. Now this new brother has turned himself in back in maybe October or something. Chapitos issued those narco mitas, those narco commandments, that there was to be no more Fetty made and sold. Now, of course, seizures of Fetty and ODs didn't really go down, so that's not indicative of there being a decrease. And there were unalived chemists being found down there near Culiacan, which is where the capital of production was at. But I think that the four sons of El Señor Guzman, who's in Florence ADX, probably would like to blame the Fetty problem more on El Mayo. Interesting little detail. These hats get issued down there in Culiacan that have certain little signs on them. Like there's one that says MZ, Mayo Zambada, and it has a Daffy Duck on the front. And that means you're under his protection, that the local police shouldn't bother you. But remember, Vicente Zambada was one of the main witnesses against Senor Guzman in the trial back in 2018. So, turnabout is fair play. One of Senor Guzman's sons captured him, grabbed him, tied him up, put a bag over his head. And again, if you look at the pictures of Mayo, he looks not like a guy that was expecting to be entering into custody. I know people are presenting the theory that he's sick and he turned himself in, but no way. It sounds likely that they dNapped him and delivered him to the U.S. And so maybe a formal deal wasn't cut, but of course an implicit deal will be cut. Look for Senor Guzman, who's been complaining about his living conditions in Florence ADX. He's been there for, 5 years now. Maybe it's time for he to step down to a max as opposed to that super max. Have a little more comfort. I don't think he's going to get out ever, but they can now say they got the two guys who are supposedly the heads of the federation centered around Culiacan. So from a U.S. law enforcement perspective, it makes for good news. Now, if you think of law enforcement as wanting to be helpful and do the right thing for the U.S. population, their goal could be simply, we got to reduce the amount of FENT flowing into the country. So if El Mayo now is in custody and Chapitos decrease or turn way down the spigot of the FENT into the country. Well, maybe if we see that this year, which would be good, they could make the claim, okay, listen, we've turned that down. We went and got the architect of the business, Mayo, and maybe they could cut a very sweet deal for a video. And this brother, I'm sure this brother didn't turn himself in if he thought he was going to do any more than maybe, seems like the limit of what these guys want to do is maybe 10 years or something. And speaking of Vicente Zambada, the one who testified against Senor Guzman, he's out. He's living in witness protection. Luis Chaparro, someone sent him a photo. This is a photo of Vicente Zambada now. This was at an airport. That's clearly him. He's free. He's traveling around the U.S. Him and his family must be living somewhere, witness protection. So, you know, he got his reward. I mean, he had to do about 11 years. He turned in $1.2 billion. I'm sure he had a little bit of money. Even if you had $1.2 billion and you hid 5% of it, that's $60 million you still have. Surprising that those guys were meeting up like that, but if he had to seize him under threat of arms, you know, Mayo showed up with the light security detail, and the Chapito son had his guys overwhelm him. And who knows, El Mayo's guys could have been in on it. One thing about those guys south of the border, they see when the writing is on the wall, they cut deals. Now, here's just me giving out scenarios. If you didn't know, down in Colombia, after they murked Don Pablo, an amnesty was declared. So for all those major traffickers, and the Ochoas were the primary beneficiaries, if you turned yourself in, you would serve 5 years and all would be forgiven. And Jorge Ochoa, the son of the big fat Ochoa, well, there was Fabio, who's finishing up a 30-year term in the U.S. now because he was dumb enough after his amnesty to come to the U.S. and do another deal. And then they had another son, I forget what his name was, but Jorge, well, Jr. is not his name, but he has the same name as his father. He did 5 years. He was considered the logistics architect. I once calculated that he oversaw the movement of 5 billion grams of the yams moved into the United States. He did 5 years. He promptly moved to Spain. He's been living openly in Spain as a businessman for 20 plus years, and he has nothing legal to worry about at this time. So the Chapitos could be trying to cut this type of deal. Be interesting if we see the tap of the Fetty Wap get turned down, and the Chapitos have been aggressively trying to take over the reefer sort of, I guess it's legal in parts of Mexico or recreational or medical or something. They want to control the dispensaries. If you could just control all the dispensaries in Mexico or in wide swaths of the country, you'd make a lot of money. You don't need to send the hard stuff to the U.S. And as they take control of more things in the economy, I mentioned before, they control the fishing industry. They extort the fishermen catching the fish, the restaurants selling it. Why not do that? Why not control the dispensaries? I'm sure they have billions of dollars invested in legal businesses, and maybe this is a time to cut a deal for the whole family, and they had to turn in the other big fella. Boy, what a blunder he made. This guy's never served a day in jail. He pled guilty. He pled not guilty in court in Texas already. He was in a wheelchair. He's indicted out of Chicago and New York and maybe San Diego, some other places as well. He'll probably be moved from place to place to be indicted and face charges. And as some of my commenters said on the day I posted the original story, they are right. They were saying a video, the brother that was taken into custody in September, was released. Now, if you look him up, it does say it was released, which is crazy. He hasn't even been to trial. Now, I'm sure he hasn't been released, but he probably has been released to some protective housing that's not in a prison, or that's pretty cut off from everyone else and may be fairly comfortable. And these guys can provide all sorts of information about the organization on this side of the border. And again, if law enforcement's job is to stop distribution of these items, if you have to cut some sweet deals with some guys, I can see some people in the Department of Justice and the U.S. government saying, okay. And of course, this could be something Biden and Kamala Harris could take credit for. So if in the coming months we see a statistically noticeable decrease in unalivings via OD, they could take the claim for having done that. So Mayo showed up for a meeting, and he was grabbed and tied up, bag put over his head, and flown to the U.S. And from the look on his face, certainly seems very believable. What's going to go on down there now? Perhaps the Mexican narcos they've ramped up the violence in the past years. Maybe they're now looking for a general amnesty like Colombia got. We'll go serve some time. We won't do it anymore. We'll keep most of our money. We'll turn in some billions, but we'll keep some other billions. And everyone goes on about their life. Pretty interesting how complex this is, and the strategery. You can see that Mr. Guzman Lopez has a much different look on his face. I mean, he doesn't look like he's having fun, but El Mayo looks like, what the hell happened? So that's a further update, and that's what his lawyer's saying, and it appears to be true to me. So that's what's going on with those activities with the guys from south of the border out profiting American dope.